Matt, if you're ready, let's get into the show.
Yeah, let's get started. I'm ready to go.
Before we talk about the brand new camcorders, I know you've been on our show before, but why don't we take a moment for you to introduce yourself to the Broadfield dealer audience?
Yeah, so my name's Matt Frazier. I work for Panasonic it's a consumer group. It falls under the Lumix brand, but obviously there's been a lot of cross platform when it comes to consumer products being used for professional applications. And consumer cameras beginning to reach more to the professional applications. So I deal with all of our business development activities. And frankly, I'm one of the two guys who approves any new integrators that want to come on board and sell Lumix products. So that's what I do.
And that's really our goal here at Broadfield. Our goal is to work with you to bring some of these integrators into the fold. And that's why we get excited about introducing new products that really fit in well in that market space. And the reason I asked you to join us today is to introduce the two brand new camcorders, the HCX2 and the HCX20. As you can see, these camcorder models are available. They're shipping now. The HCX20 at $25.99 MSRP, and the HCX2 at $31.99.99 MSRP. And we're going to ask Matt to kind of introduce these cameras to us and to talk a little bit about them. So Matt, why don't we start with the HCX20?
Perfect. Well, we go ahead and start with the X20, but before we get too deep into the X20, just want to make sure your audience is aware, these are like fresh off the grill. They are still hot to the touch. So it's not like you're getting them 4 or 5 months after they're in market. Broadfield got them as fast as anybody in the marketplace. So they're ready to sell today if you have need for them. So to begin, we're going to talk about the X20. Keep in mind that every feature that's in the X20 will also be in the X2. So the X2 will add some additional features. I thought it'd be easier to start with the 20 and then kind of walk our way up. So really, the signature benefit to going to these two cameras is the fact that you're going to a 1-inch type sensor, whereas a lot of these ENG style cameras are using 1/3 of an inch or 1/2 inch or even 1/4 inch size sensors. This gives you a much better low light sensitivity, better dynamic range out of the image. In addition, it's also going to give us just better detail overall and a shallower depth of field. So if you want something that's sort of closer to that cinema look, but you don't want to have to fight focus all the time, it really is a great compromise versus going to like a Super 35 or Micro Four Thirds sensor camera. The camera will include a 20 times optical zoom as well. So it starts with a pretty darn wide 24.5 millimeter. Now, when we say 24.5, that's the equivalent of like a photo camera's 24.5 millimeters. So it's a nice wide angle view, goes out to 24 times optical zoom. And the key features to this camera, because it is an ENG style product, it's going to include things like 4K video at up to 60 frames per second. It can do 10-bit video as well. It includes XLR audio jacks, HDMI output. And one of my favorite features is the built-in Wi-Fi function, which we'll go into more detail later on. But I'll tell you what, if you want to live stream direct from a camera, this will be about as easy a live streaming solution as you're going to find. As we move up to the X2, where the X2 really excels is as a post-production camera, because in this camera, we're going to offer you access to what we call Vlog and HLG, which Vlog is a very flat picture profile that works great for post-production to give you more dynamic range. HLG is great for live event broadcast if you're doing a live event HDR broadcast. This camera also includes an SDI port, so you're going to have access to an SDI port on this camera, whereas the X20 does not provide that. This camera will also give you timecode in and out. And it includes the Wi-Fi function, but also adds to it an Ethernet port. And if you're going to be doing recording to this product, it's going to include the ability to do what's called a proxy file, which we'll get into more detail on in a little bit.
That's great. And Matt, we're going to ask you to dive into some of these features and details. I do want to answer one of our dealers' questions that just came up, and they're curious to know what camera you're using to come into us today. I know these two new cameras are brand new, hot off the press. I don't think you've even had time to set one up. But what camera are you using?
I do have one here, actually.
Oh, you do? Awesome.
Yeah, I have one on camera now. Unfortunately, I can't shoot myself with it and show it to you at the same time. I am actually on a Panasonic S5, and I'm on a 50 millimeter f1.4 lens. Honestly, the reason I'm doing it is I want you to see what a mess there is behind me, so it gives me a nice shallow depth of field. That's why I did it. So that's what I'm shooting on.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So now let's go into some of the features. And through this, we're going to go over some of the features that are shared between the two models of the cameras, the 20 and the X2. But we're also going to talk about some of the features that are unique in that production camera with the X2 model. First of all, starting with what you were talking about with the optical zoom and that wide angle lens.
Yeah, so it's a 20 times optical zoom. It's f2.8 at the wide angle and f4.5 at the telephoto. I know some people might get confused because like our X2000 starts at an f1.8. Remember, the sensor in this camera is nearly 4 times the size of the sensor that's in the X2000. So this is a much better low light camera, even though it's an f2.8 lens. That's the benefit of going to this 1-inch type sensor. The camera, because of this higher resolution lens and higher quality lens, you're going to get very, very sharp images from the product. And then we'll move on to the next slide.
Absolutely, and I do want to say with that 1-inch lens, because I'm following some of the comments and Q&As that are coming in.
Sure.
There are some PTZ camera models now that are using a 1-inch image sensor, but it is not something you're going to find in your typical PTZ camera, especially in the live production or live streaming format. By taking this 1-inch lens with everything else that these camcorders offer and integrating them into a live production workflow, you are going to get a really nice image, especially in low light situations, house of worship, corporate AV, where maybe you're even shooting under fluorescent lighting or other kind of commercial lighting. It's really going to give you a great picture.
Yeah, especially with house of worship where you may have stained glass behind your subject, because that gets very bright and you end up with a person who's, in a very dark, shadowy look. That extra dynamic range will be very useful there. And it's, cameras like our 145 or our UE 150, they include a 1-inch type sensor. So that should give you some idea of how this would compare versus some of the Panasonic broadcast PTZ products.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things that's really nice about a traditional camcorder format is the optical image stabilization and some of the stuff that we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of refinement with this system. We always talk about this little vinyl ball that we put into the design. If you look in the graphic on the right, you can see this helps to absorb some of the energy as you're moving around to give you a more steady image, along with moving the lens system up, down, left, and right. But we've also done some substantial improvements in what's called the algorithm. We're now allowing you to tell the camera what it is you intend to do. So you'll see that we have 3 different settings for stabilization. We have the normal setting, which would just be kind of run and gun, general purpose stabilization. That's great if you're going to just be moving around with the camera. You don't necessarily have a fixed subject you're trying to interview. Whereas if you're doing an interview with someone, but you don't want to bring out the tripod, that's when you would use the stable option. It's going to do everything in its power to fight against your hand movements. So it's not going to do great for panning. If you have it in stable and you pan, you're going to move and then all of a sudden the lens will snap along after you've reached the end. So don't use stable for run and gun, but it's great if you're going to do a locked off shot. You don't want to pull the tripod out. And then pan and tilt is awesome. It gives you a locked up look, a lockdown look like it's on a tripod. And then if you just pan up and down, or you pan left to right or tilt up and down, it'll still allow for that movement without fighting against you. So a nice way to be able to handhold the product and still get really good professional looking results.
That's excellent. And then we want to talk about the 4K quality and the auto filter, the autofocus.
Right. So when we go to these larger sensors, the depth of field gets shallower, especially when we're at the longer range of the lens. So for closer to 20 times zoom, that depth of field gets pretty shallow, which means the autofocus system has to be really excellent. And so because of the way the engine works in this camera, we can actually move the lens unit in this about 240 times every second to give you very, very granular, finite adjustment of that autofocus system. And frankly, we've done comparisons versus everything that's been in the market, including our own CX350, and we found that this is our best autofocusing camera, and frankly, in this category, is the best autofocus camera on the market. So if you need autofocus, especially like house of worship applications, this is a great option for that.
That's excellent. And then we want to talk about the manual ring controls.
Right. Because this is a more professional camera, we wanted to incorporate a lot of the professional features people would expect. So we do give you triple rings. So you have a focus ring, you have iris, you have shutter speed, all adjustable, and they're programmable as well. So if you want to program them to do different things, you can program them to do different things if you need them to. Also, we give you 3 different stops of ND filters in the camera as well, which, frankly, if you're someone who works with DSLRs or certain cinema cameras, having ND filters, especially for outdoor applications, is a godsend. Just to be able to slide them right in the way instead of having to screw them onto the lens or have a matte box attached.
Awesome. Matt, one of the questions just came up is, does this pair with the Lumix tether for control?
Unfortunately, this will not work with Lumix tether because it's technically not a Lumix camera. I know my shirt says Lumix, but this is actually a Panasonic consumer camera. We have a different way of controlling this camera. It is something we've asked for, and you know, maybe at some point, someday, we can do an update to allow it to work.